Welcome to Moonbeaming, a podcast about lunar living, magic, creativity, tarot, and more. I'm your host, Sarah Faith Gottesdiener, and I'm so honored and excited to be here with you today. Welcome back to the show. I realized I haven't introduced myself or what the show is in ages, because I'm kind of assuming you've been listening for a while. But if you haven't been, or if you need a refresher, Moonbeaming is a podcast about spirituality, living with integrity. It's about magic, creativity, healing, being a small business owner, and a lot more. We've talked about protection magic and boundaries and living with ADHD and the wellness industrial complex and tarot and decoupling from white supremacy and interrogating New Age practices and a whole lot more. I could definitely be here all day, and I certainly wish I had a tagline to sum it up in 7 words or less, but right now I do not. Maybe it's because I'm not a brand, I'm a human being. And my name is Sarah Faith Gottesdiener. I'm an artist, writer, tarot reader, business runner, psychic, and dog parent, living on unceded Tongva and Chumash land, otherwise known as Los Angeles. Other words that I resonate with are highly sensitive, introvert, chronically ill, survivor, queer person, feminist, and a freak. I'm just a little weirdo living in this world, learning every day and sharing along the way. There we go. Maybe that's my tagline. Maybe I found it. Okay, so it is time for me to shout out this week's winner of our giveaway. Once a month, everyone who leaves a 5-star review and a little written blurb for this podcast gets entered in a random drawing. And that's everyone. That's everyone who's ever left a review. We go way, way back. We go all the way back. And the winner will get a 30-minute tarot reading with myself. It is a thank you and appreciation gift that I like to give to all of you. And this month's winner is Laura from the LBC. Laura from the LBC, come on down, collect your reading, email the studio, and we will schedule something for you sometime this month or next month. Thank you so much for your review. And if you would like to leave a review, go to Apple Podcasts and click those 5 stars and tell us what you like about this show. It would be appreciated so, so much. The guests we have on the show are always incredible. And our guest today is no exception. Today on Moonbeaming, we have Edgar Fabián Frías. You're probably familiar with Edgar and their work if you are online, if you are a witch, and probably if you are an artistic queer witch in particular. Edgar Fabián Frías works in installation, photography, video art, sound, sculpture, printed textiles, GIFs, performance, social practice, and community organizing, among other forms. Frías is Wixárika, and their family is from Mexico, though they have lived in the United States for most of their life. Their art addresses historical legacies and acts of resistance, resiliency, and radical imagination within the context of indigenous futurism, spirituality, play, pedagogy, animism, and queer aesthetics, weaving together the traditional and ancestral with the contemporaneous and emergent. Frías received dual BA degrees in psychology and studio art from UC Riverside. In 2013, they received an MA in clinical mental health counseling at Portland State University in Portland, Oregon. Frías is a 2022 candidate for an MFA in art practice at UC Berkeley. Edgar is amazing and a true inspiration. This is why Edgar is one of the guest facilitators for an upcoming class series I am hosting all about art and magic. It's going to be so amazing. We will be weaving together our creative practice with our magical practices in ways that encourage us to go deeper into those practices, create symbologies of our own in the hopes of making our artwork even more potent, divinatory, and supportive. There are going to be 3 classes I'll be facilitating, 3 classes that other artists are facilitating, Edgar among them, and we'll wrap it all up with a show and tell. In addition to that, there's also going to be an online community where you can share your work, your findings, your process, and hold space for one another. This all is going to take place in March, and you can enroll now. There will be a cap because this is a live class, and I want folks to get to know one another. There are also some limited scholarships for folks who are Black, Brown, Indigenous, AAPI, and all those who identify as people of color. A fun fact about me is that I used to be a professor at college. I used to teach art and design at different colleges in the LA area. So I am also thrilled to be returning to my roots. But this time I'm like doing it the witchy way. I mean, I'm always doing it the witchy way, but because it's my class, I can really do it the witchy way. If you're interested, you can click the link in the show notes. Okay, so on to this amazing interview. We covered a lot of ground. Edgar talked about how they made the leap from being a therapist to an artist, how their art is magical, ritualistic, and a gift to their ancestors. We spoke about what it is like to be a channel and the stigma around that. We talked about how we get messages from all realms, and Edgar shares a powerful story about receiving insights about his indigenous ancestry from a crystal that turned out to be real. We also got into time magic, NFTs, money, and how to make a living as an artist. Edgar is so generous and profound, and it's always such a pleasure to get to spend time with them. I know you are gonna love this. So now, on to the interview. Hello. I could not be more excited and thrilled to have someone on the podcast today who I have admired from afar, who I have been lucky enough to get to know a little bit over the last few years. We have an incredible artist in our midst today. We have someone who is really innovative, someone who I think of as a true digital witch, even if they may not resonate with that term, and we can talk about that. Someone who's really adaptable, fluid, and someone who's
truly, truly doing everything they do with a spirit of care and compassion and integrity. And that energy pours out of their work and is what attracts me so much to them. Today on the show, we have Edgar Fabián Frías. Welcome.
Oh my gosh, Sarah, such an honor to be on your podcast. I have received so much healing from the work that you do in all the different forms that you offer your genius support and care as well. And so it is such a gift to be able to connect with you. And I'm also so honored to call you a friend and to be able to also like celebrate each other's growth and, all the many ways that we change in our journeys.
Oh, yeah. I mean, speaking of growth, that was what I wanted to start out with. It seems like you've really expanded into making art your full-time volition, your full-time vocation, your full-time calling. And I know from what I know of your past that wasn't always the case.
Yeah. Yeah, it's only been in the last, I would say, 3 years that I've been a full-time artist. And, from what I was told especially in my undergrad in art school, that wasn't going to be a possibility. And I never thought it would be a possibility to be a full-time artist. And so it feels like such a blessing and a gift. And I also know how hard I've worked to get to this point too.
So I'm curious, previously, so you went to undergrad for art. You were always an artist. Obviously, most artists always are artists, however they make art.
Right.
You went to undergrad for art, and then because you sort of were told that this wasn't going to maybe be an option, did you go into a different path, like for money? Or I'd love to hear a little bit about what you were doing before, how that maybe even resonates, or where there are similarities to an artist, and how kind of that transformation began.
Definitely. Yeah. So when I did my undergrad, I got a dual BA degree, mostly because my parents were really against me doing an art practice degree. And I started off with a psychology degree and ended up kind of hiding the fact that I was doing a dual BA in art practice for a while until I finally came out of the closet with my parents about being an artist. And, they were very supportive of me doing psychology, but very wary of this, notion of art. And also got that message from a lot of people in culture too, find a vocation that's stable. And so I love therapy work. I love psychology. And so that was also another love of mine. And, when I moved to Portland, Oregon, I ended up going to Portland State University and got a master's in clinical mental health counseling. And I definitely feel like there have been many intersections between that work. I received also training as a somatic psychotherapist and really worked with mindfulness, with psychic phenomenon within therapeutic practice. And so I definitely found witches in that space. And I feel like it's through my own healing work that I did both as a therapist and also as someone receiving therapy, that I really started to understand that art was a passion of mine, and that I was really scared of it, and that I was really impacted by the messages that I had heard growing up about it not being a stable vocation. And, all that is very true, right? And also, I've also realized that, through that instability, there's also a big possibility as well.
Wow, that's amazing. Can you remember a moment where you were able to start expanding around the idea of art and possibility?
Yeah. There are a few moments, but I think one of them was pretty big. I have an old professor named Asher Hartman, and it was my art teacher when I was an undergrad, and I immediately felt connected to him. He was one of the first people that really introduced this notion that art could be really expansive, that it didn't have to be paintings or drawings, that it could be relationships, it can be, spaces. And when I moved to Los Angeles early in 2016, he took me out to lunch and he essentially gave me a reading. And in his reading, he told me that if I made room for my art practice in my career, and that meant not going after what I had been told my whole life, which was like, you have to find a full-time job, like that was like my go-to. And I, for about 6 months, was working part-time as a therapist, trying to get my art practice going and really treating it seriously. And that to me feels like one of those portals where I like really trusted and went through that fear and uncertainty. And it all unfolded exactly as he said. He like gave me a path essentially, and it fully unfolded in that way. And so that to me was one of those really big moments where I finally took that leap and was like, okay, I'm going to really treat this as my work, treat this as like what I'm doing in my life, as opposed to having it as a side practice or thing that I do outside of work.
And I think this is such a beautiful metaphor for anyone who's trying to make some kind of change, anyone who's trying to call something to them, anyone who's trying to integrate a dream into more of an everyday reality. So I want to continue on this thread, if that's okay, and ask you, well, what were the maybe more practical or everyday things that you found yourself doing successfully to reorient yourself around having the art practice be more of your life and your calling?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I what I feel called to share is during that time I was also microdosing, and I had a moment where I just got a direct download from the mushrooms, and it was during those months where I was just like really trying to make it my career, and the mushrooms told me to go to my planner, and really start to plan out what that looked like structurally to actually have an art practice. And it meant I needed studio time. It also meant that I needed to think about residencies. I needed to think about grants. I needed to find time, create time to apply for things, to get rejected. I needed all of that to really just become a part of my life. So reorienting to many times living a year and a half in the future, as an artist, because a big part of being an artist means that you're always planning a year ahead. You're always thinking of exhibitions or residencies or grants. And so that's so different than, I'm working every single day and that's like what I'm orienting around. And so it really means that you also have to think of time in a very different way. And one thing that comes up is I remember my mom, when I first told her about this decision, she was really worried and, was like, you need to be working more, you need more money. And I remember telling her, Mom, I understand that in one day of work, I could make like $200, $300, in a job as a part-time therapist. Or I could use that day to apply for something that could potentially give me $25,000 and then help me have a whole year or even longer to really focus on my art. And it was about like a year after that I got my first artist residency that was like $20,000 and did give me that big push into actually where I'm at now, where I'm now, full-time really working as an artist.
Wow. I also want to think about this. I want to think about time magic, because this is what you're bringing up here with thinking about time differently, thinking about energy differently. And time has been a very challenging relationship for me since the pandemic, basically, in ways that it never has been before. Like for me personally, my ADHD, which I could always manage my whole life, I managed it mostly unmedicated. It was the first, has been the first time that I've been feeling like time and I we're not friends. And I was hoping just personally, and I also have, because of what I do, I hear from a lot of people. And so I can sometimes pick up on certain themes. And I know that a lot of folks are struggling in all senses of the word. I'm not trying to minimize anyone else's pain at this time. And also, I've heard from a lot of people that time is becoming more challenging for them. You know, depth, relationship, quality time. Very Saturnian over here, and
Right.
sort of like Neptunian in a way. So I was hoping that you could speak to maybe how your relationship with time had to change, because what I heard you saying when you were talking with your mom is that, like, seeing time more as a resource
Right.
instead of maybe other societal beliefs around time. Did you have to do your own work around shifting your relationship to time?
Yeah, it's definitely something that I worked on in therapy a lot,
Mm,
because I feel like, growing up, I never really had example of people who had their own businesses. Like,
yeah.
I, for the most part, knew people who were working hourly, and that was really how my mind and my being had been structured. And so it took a lot of work, a lot of therapy work to start to decouple that relationship and to
Hmm.
really see time as something that can be really worked with, that can be really utilized in a way that is magical, that does take risk, as opposed to the other belief that I really had was that, like, I was only worth a certain amount of money and that I had to really invest a lot of labor and time to make the money that I needed. And so, I definitely, in the beginning, when I first started down this path, I had what I call capitalist panic a lot.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it kept creeping up to me. And I feel like that was one of the big things that I worked on in therapy, was like, how do I kind of
Hmm.
ask that to step aside,
Hmm.
to give me space so that I can dream, that I can imagine other possibilities with time?
Yeah. The one thing that came up for me so much as you were speaking is we really have to uncouple from this very insidious and very harmful belief that time is money. And that's one of the things that I taught. I did a money alchemy download because of my, I run a business, but for much of my life, I was an hourly employee. I was a waitress, I was a nanny, and even when I started working for myself, I was working hourly. I was charging by the hour. And what I realized is that when you begin a business, when you want to shift your relationship to money, when you want to shift your relationship to anything, you have to uncouple from a scarcity mentality. And in fact,
Yeah.
time is not money. Like, it has been imprinted on us, but you can't start a business, in my humble opinion, I'm only speaking from my own experience. You cannot start a business with the same mentality that was given to you by a boss or a
Mm,
manager or society, or what we've been groomed and bred to think of. And I love that you're bringing that up here in your own process, because I do think that art and time and purpose and magic is like all really connected if we want to move forward in an anti-capitalist way and a pro imagination, in a pro sacredness, in a pro web, everything is connected, interdependent way. So I really love that, and it's something for me to think about as I'm like I'm realizing now that maybe I've internalized some ideas around time being something that we manage, or time being something that we control. And if we're not, in quote, managing or controlling it, in quote, good or well, or that it's somehow a problem, when maybe it's not. Like, maybe there's some other way to collaborate instead of trying to control it.
Yeah, I think opening up to possibility. I know that art for me was one of those first spaces where I really felt that, where I was confronted with something that opened me up to another state of consciousness that is really outside of what you're naming, the states that we're like kind of forced fed to exist in or forced to be in. And yeah, there is like an alchemy that can happen. I think, one thing that from those moments of capitalist panic, now I'm in my third year of not working at, an hourly job, and I almost don't remember what that feels like anymore. And that is something that feels shocking, to be like, wow, I am living now in a life where time feels so expansive. And I even like don't feel like the urge and need to like respond to emails immediately, or like really feel like I have to be planning even. Like I'm at a place right now where I'm going to graduate with my degree and I don't have things lined up, but I'm also like so excited by all the possibility. And there is something that has fully shifted, and I really see art as being that portal that can really allow us to experience other states of being, that can allow us to imagine other possibilities. And I really believe in the power of art to be that conduit, that portal.
I completely agree. And I want to talk a little bit about the roles of a magical practice within your art practice. It feels like to me your art is imbued with magic. And I was hoping you could speak to your understanding of that relationship between art and magic in your own life and your own experience.
Yeah, so my first experience of seeing art, contemporary art, was when I was 14. And I saw a piece at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art that I would say threw me into my first experience of an altered state of consciousness. It just like flung me in there. And what that did was that it was really disorienting and really exciting and confusing. And I remember when I got home, I immediately told my mom that I wanted to go to the library because I wanted to learn what this art thing is. And so from the beginning, I feel like art and magic have been interwoven together. They've been part of a similar experience. And, as I've gotten older and been able to connect more with my Indigenous ancestry, I've also really learned that many Indigenous communities do not separate art and magic, and do not separate art and ritual or art and healing. And so I do really feel like that moment of disorientation was a moment where there was other messages that came in. And I really now can look back and see that as my ancestors coming in and providing like a glimpse of a possibility. And, when I was younger, like I saw people who were in the art space kind of risen on a pedestal, and like never thought I could ever enter that space, especially as a person of color, as a child of undocumented immigrants. I never saw myself being able to be in that space. And yet I feel like my ancestors and guides really wanted me to pay attention. They really wanted me to really consider this as a path, regardless of what I heard growing up about it. And so I really do feel like that's why that dream has always existed in me, is that I've been really guided. And so art for me has always been connected with sacred guidance, sacred connection. And so I think that's a big part of what's really pushed me to dedicate my life to it too.
Are your art pieces done ritualistically?
Yes, a lot of the work that I do is done ritualistically. I feel like I process a lot, I transmute a lot of my emotions in my artwork. And I also receive much guidance from my guides and my ancestors in ceremony for pieces. And I've had many experiences where I receive downloads, especially I do like divination with scrying with obsidian and water. And I've had many experiences where I received like basically projects that my guides would be like, here, you're going to do this. And many times they don't don't make sense in the moment, but I write them down. And then, I will have a curator or a friend reach out to me and be like, I had a dream that you were working on this project and I would love to help make that happen. And so I know that it's just like not me having that experience individually, that it's part of a much larger collective process happening, and that my ancestors are really wanting messages to come through me. And so I really feel like that ceremony, that communion, is really a big part of the work too.
I'm wondering if your relationship with being able, I'm sorry, let me start that again. I'm wondering if your experience of receiving information from your guides and also your ancestors, was that easy to begin to receive, or was that a whole nother layer or whole other process?
I feel like it's taken me a while to get to a place. I feel like I grew up Christian, and so oracular practices were always seen like kind of deemed as like demonic or evil for me. And yet growing up, I had so many experiences of receiving psychic visions, of downloads, of having moments that felt really scary, especially because I had no context, or I had no one to, other than some close friends, to really share about them with. And I'm so grateful for the different plants and animals that have really forged a path towards me, that really allowed me to understand that I have a gift, that I have an ability. And it's also taken me a lot of personal work to get to a place where I really can honor what comes through and also not be afraid of it, and to be able to openly share about it. As I work in mental health, I know how much people can be stigmatized for sharing their visions. And it's also been a great honor of mine to be able to support some of those people and to be able to really validate and honor people's gifts in the midst of, them being told that they're, having a psychotic break by their family, or being told that their poetry or their art or their writings are useless. And, having to really validate people has been really healing for me as well, because I know that experience so much.
It's such a process to go through that I relate to so much, in terms of having so much shame or fear around, I'm going to put in quotes, coming out as like a psychic, as someone who receives transmissions that are not of you, and that are not necessarily being able to be seen. It's very, I personally had a lot of shame, and it was definitely because of that white supremacist, patriarchal, capitalist violence that says that if you are intuitive, if you can understand what plants are saying to you, like even my house plants, also is like, oh, gotta like move you around, like they're like letting me know what they need. Animals, guides, angels, ancestors, so on and so forth. And I think the more that people can share, at least, like I've definitely just had to get to this place for me personally with sharing publicly, one, because it's one of the ways I make a living, like it's one of my jobs. Right. And two, there was so much ancestral shame that when I started contacting my ancestors, particularly my ancestors on my mother's side, they all were like quaking. They did not want me to be doing this. They did not want me to be sharing because they were so stigmatized, because there's so much mental health stuff, and they were punished for sharing, the few times they would share. And I just think in general, it's very difficult to be a highly sensitive person. And obviously 3 or 4 generations ago was very different. And I found that for me, part of my healing, but part of my ancestral healing was being able to have the courage and the vulnerability, because vulnerability is courage, to come out and be really clear that actually I'm psychic. Like, I'm not intuitive. I'm not sensitive. I think words are really important. And I think that by being open about this and saying like, hey, like, some people experience these gifts, some people experience other ways of seeing, other ways of being, and that's okay. And you can do it too. It's not just some people. It's like everyone, just like everyone has an imagination, everyone has these special gifts, everyone can do it. And so I feel grateful that you speak about this as well, because there's definitely still quite a bit of stigma, even within like so-called witchcraft or spiritual community, Yeah.
Yeah. And I really appreciate that you brought up the patriarchy and colonization, because I really feel like that's imprinted in us and in our like familial and also spiritual networks. And yeah, it, really makes me think of like how I even came to understand that I'm Indigenous was I received a message from a rock. And I think that there are ways that, we can as humans like kind of tune into, or sometimes feel into the messages that are wanting to come through from plants or animals or crystals or, people. And there are times where those messages just get beamed at you and you're not even trying to tune in, you're doing something and all of a sudden you're hearing these messages. And it was a crystal that, really told me that I needed to really speak with my father and that there was something ancestral. And after I spoke with him, he shared that my grandfather would speak with crystals, and it's something he had never told me about. And I asked him, like, why didn't you ever tell me? Like, because, for me, I've like really connected with the witchcraft community. A lot of it has been because of the queer and trans community. And I've always seen witchcraft as a very queer and trans thing and been a part of like all my queer and trans friends. And to have my father be like, yeah, your grandfather spoke with crystals. And, he said that it was something that they were shamed out of doing, essentially, when they moved into like a village in Mexico, that they all stopped practicing and they all stopped sharing. And I think that's also, really deeply imprinted in us. And I think it's why it's important to be public and to really share and, to also inhabit different spaces, like, to say, like, I can be at UC Berkeley, I can be an academic, and I can also speak about psychic phenomenon. And I think I can have a master's in counseling and validate other people's psychic experiences. And I think that's so important because it is something that has left such a deep wound in so many of us.
Oh yeah. I'm so grateful to hear all about that. And I also want to sort of parse out, we find healing by taking risks. And even though it might not have seemed that way, you being able to receive, sometimes being able to receive is a risk. You being able to receive that message and say, okay, I'm going to honor this by following the thread, and you taking another risk by speaking with your father about something you've never talked about, and then receiving all of this confirmation is really beautiful.
Yeah, it's been life-changing. It's opened up a whole other world to me, and it's also allowed my father and I to openly speak about our Indigenous ancestry and to have me learn more about it, because it's been something that's been kept from me and something that I could have potentially died not even knowing. and so grateful for that intervention, that came in this life. And yes, that vulnerability, as you're naming, of taking that risk of bringing it into relationship.
It's like, thank goddess for that crystal. Like,
Yes.
what kind of crystal was it?
I have no idea. It's like clear. It kind of reminds me of both a calcite and a quartz crystal, but it's clear and orange. I still have it on my altar because it's one of my most sacred crystals at this point.
I love that so much. I also you're kind of answering this, but I want to hear it directly from you. At least right now, who or what do you feel like your art is in conversation with?
Yeah, that's such a big question. I definitely feel like I'm in conversation with a bunch of queer and trans artists who have both transitioned and also who are still here on this planet. And I also feel like I'm very much in conversation with a huge network of visionaries who are imagining and forging another world into existence. And I'm also so grateful to be in connection, in conversation with Indigenous artists who are really bringing Indigenous practices into the present and the future, and have been so thrilled by Indigenous futurism and ways of imagining Indigenous practices on the internet, in the digital sphere, and beyond. And I think that's something that has been such a gift in the last few years for me, is meeting other Indigenous artists who are also, digital witches, or really working the digital, because I have felt for a long time like the digital belonged to, the white community, or it was a part of a Western concept that like didn't have anything to do with the past. And I really feel like I've let that thought go now.
This is a perfect interlude because I wanted to start talking about the digital realm and digital witchery. I know that a lot of people may know you from your digital presence, from these delicious memes, these beautiful spells that you cast through using technology, and like ready-made technology a lot of the time, fusing them with your imagination and with your incantations. And I was wondering if you could just share about how that aspect of your art practice came to be.
Yeah, I've always been someone who's loved sharing my work publicly, and also sharing my practice publicly, and feel like I have been really galvanized by witnessing other witches stepping into their power. And I feel like being a part of that has felt so freeing and empowering, because I feel like for a long time, back when you and I kind of knew of each other in Portland, I felt so alone as a witch at that time. And I felt very much like being someone who was interested in art and witchcraft put me in a very unique place where I felt very alienated. And to find other witches who are also artists really encouraged me to like go full in and be like, I want to meet as many of these people as possible. I want to build community with these folks. I want to empower each other. And so I've seen myself as being a part of like a big web, and it's been that web that's really helped me feel so resilient in the face of maybe having people not be believers, or having online harassment, or all the things that being public comes with. And it's really been encouraging to feel like I'm a part of something much larger than myself. And that's been a big reason why I've been called to really share publicly. And also, I've really witnessed that when I receive messages to share spells, or to share works that for me are personal, or that for me are a part of my own healing, I've really seen that it's really touched others, and that it's been really reflected back to me that the ways that I'm being guided to really work are really being felt by the community. And so I feel like that's really supported me in really feeling like I'm a voice for a community that is, for the most part, is global and is connected through these interfaces that we connect with online.
Yes, it is. I was going to ask you, how do you deal with digital burnout?
Taking many moments to step away, I think, is really important. I feel like I'm not very public about when I step away, but I do give myself a lot of permission to not be online, especially because so much of my work now is online, whether I'm responding to emails or
Hmm.
having to take classes online, and that
Yeah.
I know how important it is to go outside and walk and look at the trees and connect with the clouds. And I try to do that at least once a day, just to give myself non-screen time, um and also like not feeling like I'm beholden to, because I think that was something that, being on certain social media platforms, you can kind of sometimes have that feeling that you need to keep feeding the machine. And letting go of that has also been really powerful, to not really feel like I have to give anything to any platform, and to really allow myself to post when it makes sense, when I feel excited about it, and also to give myself permission to post things that, or share things that maybe feel trivial or feel like they're not fully thought out. So, really being open about being someone who enjoys process and really honors process, and not really trying to. Yeah, and I feel like letting go of this feeling that my work has to be perfect, or it has to
Mm.
be a certain way for other people to receive it, because I've kind of noticed the opposite, honestly.
What do you mean by that? What do you mean you noticed opposite?
I guess like one thing that has been both humbling and also really amazing for me has been that, like, some of the things that I've released into the public that I like barely thought about,
Right. Yeah, you're
like,
like boop, and it's like
yeah,
boosh.
just boop. And then, yeah, they receive the most feedback, the most engagement. And then, there's sometimes things that I work on for months and months and months and months and months, it gets like zero engagement, and nobody cares about it, and that's been super humbling and also really eye-opening, of like, there's power to those blips, there's power to those moments that are just really inspired and also fun, because I feel like a lot of those
Hmm.
blips are really fun. Like, I'm just doing this
Hmm.
because I don't know why, I'm just doing it fun.
Yeah, I love that so much. It just reminds me of this very spiritual law or idea that one is not to believe the hate or the negative that comes at, and one is not to believe in the extreme adoration. It's like either extreme is
Yeah,
not helpful to us as humans, to our egos as creators. And that's also something I've really had to do a lot of healing around. And I feel like in this lover's year, where we're going to continue to see so much polarity, like we have to be really mindful that, as you said, sometimes, actually most of the time, the process and the practice and being present for it, like that's the reward. Like,
right.
it, did you have fun while you were doing something? Did you learn something? Was it interesting? Did it help you get something out? Did it redirect your attention and recenter you? Like, I feel like these are the questions we need to be asking ourselves, especially when we're engaging with the digital realm. And I love speaking with people who have such a different experience of the digital realm, because I'm so introverted and I'm very I just, in sharing myself publicly is not enjoyable for me. Like, it's just not. So it's so, and I don't know that it ever will be. And I've
Right.
had such a ambivalent relationship with social media and with sharing myself publicly. And also, because of the times we're living in, I'm someone who I value like authentic, intimate connection with people. And so I find myself feeling like that the digital space and sharing myself in the ways that feel comfortable to me, and sometimes in ways that feel risky to me, are really, really helpful. Like having a podcast, getting to spend time with you, getting to connect with other people digitally are really, really important. So I find myself renegotiating and recalibrating that relationship almost every day, basically. And so it's so nice to hear from other people, such as yourself, who it feels like you have a very open and playful and fun relationship with the technology, like the technology isn't using you. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. And I would say I'm someone who like vacillates in between being introverted and extroverted. And so I think there are moments where I need to just step away, and there are moments where I really relish in that connection. And also I do feel like in the last couple of years, because of the pandemic, all of us are having to renegotiate our relationship to the digital and what it means to be intimate in the digital space, to build community, to ask for support, all the things that maybe we would do a lot more in person. We're kind of being pivoted to really doing a lot more of this digitally. And so that divide, that maybe artificial divide between the physical and the digital has really been brought into question, or at least a lot of us are kind of having to renegotiate that.
Yeah, I love that idea though, because as I've continued to teach, the community and the intimacy and the connection and the healing, honestly, like I've been blown away by the healing that happens, that I've witnessed, that I've been part of. So I love that dissolution of the digital. And I also actually, because I want to continue to parse out this thread because it feels very lovers to me, in the sense of the way that we interact online can sometimes be a reflection of how we show up IRL, whatever you want to call it, or away from keyboard. I've heard some people say.
Right. Yeah, legacy Russell. Yeah.
And so it's fascinating and interesting for me, you're opening up this portal for me and my imagination. You're giving me possibilities, and hopefully you definitely are giving many folks listening possibilities. I wonder if this is just a beautiful permission slip to be able to explore the different facets of ourselves online. That it's not like, oh, I'm going to restrict myself or I'm not going to share, but oh, I feel called to share this facet. Or maybe I will share in this way over here in this digital space, and I'm going to be careful in this other space. Like, do you have any thoughts around that idea?
Yeah, I feel like we can start to understand ourselves as you're naming, through these spaces, and also take on other parts of ourselves that we could maybe not feel like we have space for in the away from keyboard space. I am really excited by like some people that I know that like kind of create personas or alter egos that they inhabit. And, I definitely feel like I do that. Maybe I don't like change my name, but I do feel like I have different parts of myself that can show up in different spaces. And also, I really feel like I've learned a lot about who I am through these spaces, through the reflections that I receive from others. And I think it's even questioned for me. I think I'm someone who, for the most part, when I was younger, was super introverted and never could have seen myself as a public person. And I feel like people have really given me that like courage, the permission, and the reflection back that they enjoy seeing me in the public space, that they want more of me in the public space. And so it's really pushed that like introverted part of me to be like, okay, like let me like build up the courage to continue to do this and to really show up in a way that like I'm feeling really encouraged to do by other people. And maybe I wouldn't do it if I didn't have that feedback.
I mean, you're absolutely delightful. So why wouldn't people want more from you all the time? We all want more from you all the time because of how incredible you are. And I wanted to talk about another part of your practice, or a part of the digital art world that I have seen you participate in that I'm really curious about. And I know a lot of other people are really curious about, and that is NFTs.
Yes. Yeah, I'm now in my a little over a year in the NFT space. So it's kind of a new emergence that has shown up in my art practice, definitely.
So, for people listening, can you please quickly explain what NFTs are, how they function, all of that?
Yeah, so an NFT is essentially you, let's say, as an artist, creating an edition, that you're connecting officially to yourself, and you're deciding what you release, how many editions, what you price it for, and it's for any digital work. And I think one thing that feels really revolutionary about this is that as someone who works a lot with contemporary art world, with museums and gallery spaces, the digital has always been an issue for them. I feel like there have been times where I've been asked to sell my work as a digital work, let's say like a video, for example, and the gallery has wanted me to create a specific USB for it or create a certain like way to share it so that it becomes a physical object that they can sell. And so the NFT opens up the possibility for you as an artist to say that this is an edition that I'm selling of this piece. And so I think one big thing that's been so transformational for me around this is that I have such a prolific, expansive digital practice that for the most part, I have felt growing up was like kind of worthless. I kind of saw it as like my process and have so much work that I never took care of because I never thought of it as like something that needed to be archived and historicized. And whereas now I feel like the opposite, like my work now has been collected by over 100 people, and it's only growing in that in the sense that I feel like people are really excited about my digital work, and it's I think in a way like making me value and think a lot about what it means to have so much work out there, and also what it means for the hierarchies to really be usurped and reorganized. Because I think that's a big part of it too, is that there has been and still is a hierarchy within the art realm of what kind of artwork is valuable, what isn't valuable. And even last year when I was getting into NFTs, I was teaching a class about like time-based media, and we were talking about how a lot of like feminist video artists, when they first started showing their work, no one wanted to buy it either. People thought it was like not worth anything. And of course, now a lot of that work is really valuable. And so I do feel like we're in that phase again, in a sense, where the digital is being now kind of elevated, and people who have been working with like let's say the internet aesthetic, or who have been really informed by the internet, have been making work, have been creating for a long time, and now the work is finally being able to be collected and sold.
And when you make an NFT, are you also the one who's selling it? Like, is it linked directly to a crypto wallet? Like, literally, how does it work? Because people are always saying, oh, Sarah, because I basically basically the only work I've done in the last few years has been digital.
Right.
And so people are like, you should make this an NFT. And I'm like, I'm literally like this ancient grandma who barely knows how does this even work? Let me know. How does this work? How do you do it?
Yeah, so it is connected to a wallet, and so when you mint something, because you have to mint something from your wallet into an NFT, you are putting it on the blockchain, and you are essentially kind of authenticating it yourself. And so you can do it through a platform. There are multiple platforms where you could sell your NFTs. I know that some artists are now minting their own contracts and selling through their own contracts. There are some people that are now like kind of providing because I feel like I'm not that like versed in the technical side of it. I think you kind of do need to know, if you want to actually like bypass certain like platforms, you have to know a lot of coding and like how to like get your stuff into the blockchain through like maybe the back end. But there are people who are now providing like pathways for artists to make their own contracts. And so essentially you connected to your wallet. It's authenticated through to you. And just to give you an example of like kind of how I've been hearing certain social media companies wanting to take this technology, because of all the scammers that have been online right now, there are some internet companies that I've been hearing, social media companies that are wanting to have you get the option of minting your profile photo. And so that would authenticate you as connected to that wallet, to that photo. And so it would really authenticate your whole account. And so it's one way that like they're thinking of using this technology to really authenticate people on the internet. And so there are some people that are now selling NFTs for virtual real estate, for experiences. I just saw someone sell a photo NFT that also came along with it, like consultation for a year. And so if you bought this photo, you got to like meet with this artist for a year. So there are ways that services are kind of being brought into NFTs. And I've definitely seen like PDFs and music videos. So anything that can be produced digitally and even have like a personal experience can be minted and purchased and then resold. And so one also big thing that I think is important to name is that when you sell an NFT, you as an artist can decide how much of a percentage you get from that resale. And so one thing that happens to a lot of artists is that, you know, because we live in capitalism, they'll sell a lot of their work for really cheap because they need to eat, you know, and later on their names get bigger and they don't see any of that money. And so this is providing at least some sort of pathway for artists to receive the benefits of their hard work, of being able to like really push their art and really receive those benefits in the future when that work gets resold again.
I love all of this so much because it's also bringing up these challenges, I'm just going to say, about the digital space, which is authenticity, which is being able to connect someone's work with recuperation of some kind. And I also know that you mentioned, I'm just really curious also, you mentioned that NFTs are a bit controversial. And so I'm just curious, what's controversial? Do you think it's just pushback because it's a new way of doing things, or are there other issues that people need to be aware of in the NFT space right now, which I'm super aware that maybe 6 months from now it will like be different, right? So it's so changing.
Yeah, there have been a few things that have come up. You know, as I said, one thing that the NFT creates is that people get to self-identify as an artist and really self-proclaim. And so that kind of is something that I have noticed that has been irking some gatekeepers, you know, both in the like contemporary art space and also within like the traditional art market. I have noticed pushback, and there being a way that NFTs are being trivialized and minimized and seen as a joke or seen as a fad. And one thing that's been unfortunate is that a lot of the people who've made press with NFTs have been straight white men who have produced really problematic, boring, annoying work. And so a lot of people think of NFTs.
Shocking.
Yeah, right. And so a lot of people, when they think of NFTs, they'll think of that art and they'll just dismiss it, not knowing that there are huge communities of queer, trans, BIPOC artists who are in the space who are really trying to sell their work and really be authentic about what they're doing. And even, for example, this last year, one project that I was really excited to support is a project that is minting some art of my people in Mexico, the Birarica, and using the funds to actually help build technological infrastructure where they live. And showing them how to mint their artwork that they make with yarn and wax, and usually sell like in traditional, you know, art markets, let's say, to actually start to mint some of that work too. too, and so that they can start to receive some of that support as well. And so I do feel like there's been a gatekeeping where certain communities have been excluded, and there are a lot of problematic like bros in the space, I would say. And also there are networks of people that are like finding each other and creating community. And so along with that, I also wanted just to mention too that at the beginning, when they first started to blow up and get really popular, there was a huge smear campaign on NFTs saying that they were environmentally destructive, that they were going to destroy the earth. And I think, this was also done, I feel, on purpose, because this is a friend of mine who's now in the space. Like, the way we talked about it was like, straight cis white men aren't going to give a shit about that conversation, like they're going to be like, okay, whatever. And then, a lot of folks who, are really caring about the planet, who really don't want to contribute to this, like, are gonna just like step away from that. And I feel like that was almost done on purpose to then have straight white men colonize the space again and be able to really reap the benefits of that market. And I think one way that I've really thought about this is that all media produces energy, needs energy. So like, let's say whether you're listening to a podcast or you're watching something on YouTube or on Netflix, it all needs energy. And so it's all of these systems are using energy, and USD fiat is the most toxic, destructive monetary system out there. And so, yes, the Ethereum system is destructive, but if we really want to look at it, then we also need to stop participating in the USD fiat system too, right? And so I think I really do feel like this campaign was done to really exclude certain people. And so myself and other queer and trans and BIPOC artists in the space have really been trying to encourage folks to come into the space, because we don't want it to just become another mirror of the traditional art market where only straight white men get supported for the work that they do.
Edgar, thank you for sharing all of this. It gives me a lot to think about, and I'm really excited by it. I'm excited to learn more about this. Where would you suggest people like myself and other artists, if they're curious about the space, what do you suggest they do first?
I definitely say dedicate more time on Twitter, because there are a lot of these artists, a lot of people who are doing innovative things in the NFT space on Twitter. Almost none of them are on the other social media platforms. And I would say there are some people, like, for example, my friend Sarah Zucker, who is the one who really introduced me to NFTs. She's someone who really is both a champion and shares a lot of information very freely and openly about the NFT space, and also someone who I feel is a good person to look at for thinking about how to mint your work, or how to promote your work or share your work. And also that there are a lot of free resources both on YouTube, or some of these platforms like Foundation have like information about NFTs if you're interested in kind of learning the more technical side of it. And there are a lot of people in these spaces that are really wanting to support folks. So if there's anyone who wants that kind of support, definitely feel free to reach out to me on Twitter too. I can definitely connect you with some people that I really trust and work with as well in that space.
Oh, you're so generous. You're so generous. Thank you so much. You are going to be one of the very, very, very special guest teachers in an upcoming container I'm having in March with all about art and magic. I'm still oddly trying to find a name for it. I think I might just call it art and magic. It's like, okay, let's just art magic.
Yes.
Art magic. I'm going to be inviting you to be speaking about magic as spell work and using our own art as a scrying device to receive messages and healing. Can you share maybe just like a little glimpse into what it might look like for folks to engage more deeply in a dialogue with their own creative practice, not only just with visual art or writing, but life as an artistic practice?
Yeah, I'm so excited for this, and I feel like it fits so perfectly with where I am with my art. There's a concept that I've been really working with in the last couple of years called Nierika, and it's a sacred tool of my people, the Bidarika. And the Nierika is both a map, it's a map that we create, and it's also a world building tool. And I see art
Mm.
in that way, where it's both a way that we can imagine and create possibilities in our life. And also, when we are finished, we can take a step back and we can learn and we can really kind of trace things out. And of course, as you're naming, this is really both having to do with individual, let's say, artworks, and also just with the way that we organize and build our lives, and knowing that we have that same imagination and also that same level of communication that's constantly happening with what's around us. And so, yes, I feel like divination is something that's done both in ceremonial settings, and it's also a huge process of life in general too.
Yeah, yeah, yes. My dear, I could talk to you all day, but we're at time. So, where can folks find you? I know everyone's going to want more. Give us all the places. Obviously, we will link in the show notes. Where are you the most? How can people follow you more intimately? Do you have a newsletter? Do you have a website? What are you excited about? Give us all the things, Edgar.
Yes. So I have a website, edgarfabianfrias.org, and I usually update that pretty consistently with upcoming events and projects. And I also have a newsletter that you could find through my website. And I have a link tree which connects to everything, including all my accounts and my newsletter. So I'll definitely share that with all of you. And I'm just so excited that I'm almost done with my graduate program at UC Berkeley. And I have an exhibition planned for May for our MFA thesis show. And that's like kind of a big part of what like my mind is wrapped up in. And what's so beautiful is that one of the pieces is a Nierika that I'm working on that I just shared. And I'm actually going to be hosting at the new Institute for Contemporary Art in San Francisco an upcoming workshop that's also around kind of gazing into Nierika and doing divinatory work with hopefully we're going to print a really large one that people will be able to connect with. So if you're in the Bay Area, definitely look out for that too, because you can come and participate in person.
That is so exciting. Thank you so much for being here. It was so wonderful to connect. I'm so grateful. And I love you and adore you so much.
Oh, love you too, Sarah. It's such an honor to connect with you and to be your friend. And so excited to be a part of this podcast and also to be hosting a workshop with you that is around two of the biggest things in my life that have really transformed my life in ways that I cannot even name at this moment. So thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay, my dears, how lovely and deep and relatable was this conversation. I am sure that you are more than a little inspired and are probably thinking about how you can take some of Edgar's wisdom and fold it into your own life. I'm so grateful to them for being here, for their honesty, their vulnerability, and all their heart-centered shares. So go follow Edgar on social if you aren't already. Visit their website, immerse yourselves in their art, and let them know what resonated with you. Have a beautiful day, everyone. Until soon. Moonbeaming is brought to you by The Moon Studio. It is created and hosted by me, Sarah Faith Gottesdiener. Additional assistance is provided by Hazel Frew. Sound art is by Will Owen. And the show is supported by The Moon Studio's Patreon. Thanks so much for your support. If you like this podcast, please rate, review, subscribe, and tell a friend. It's much appreciated. Thanks for being here.